Hey guys, it's Lauren from the Express Lane, and today we are talking about all things behavioral interview questions. Now, this video really goes to show that inspiration can come from the unlikeliest sources. It was a couple weekends ago that I was sitting around with some friends and we were just chatting about life, chatting about where we were at with our career and kind of what was going on. And one of my friends brought up the fact that she's doing some hiring right now. She has been doing some different interviews, and one of the things that she found that her applicants were really struggling with was answering behavioral interview questions. Now, one of my other friends chimed in and they said, well, what's a behavioral interview question? I've never heard of that before. So we just kind of continued the conversation and kept chatting. I even brought up the fact that I was actually asked some behavioral questions on a reference call that I did. The person calling for the reference was asking me some questions about how this potential applicant actually, acted on the job and what their behavior was like. So it was just really interesting to me that all three of us had different experiences with behavioral interview questions in very different ways. And I was like, you know what? This is going to be a great topic for a video. So, in case you had the same thought that my friend did about what exactly is a behavioral interview question, even though you might not be familiar with the term, I can guarantee that you have been asked at least one behavioral interview question in your life, as they're becoming more and more and more common in interviews that take place every day. A behavioral interview question asks you, as the interviewee, to describe a situation at work and talk specifically about how you acted or reacted in that situation. And the reason why the interviewer is asking you this question is because they are trying to be able to pinpoint what your behavior was like previously on the job, to use that as an indicator of what your behavior might be like in the future on the job. And that, makes sense, right? How you've reacted to a situation in the past is a pretty good indicator of how you're going to react to a situation in the future. And what's interesting about these types of questions is that they can actually show an interviewer what your behavior is like with certain types of coworkers. It can show an interviewer how well you got along with people. It can show an interviewer how well you prioritize tasks at work. It can even help to shed some light on what your growth potential looks like and what your aspirations might be like moving forward in this new potential company. Fun fact, even we at Express Employment Professionals use behavioral interview questions when we conduct all of our initial interviews with our associates. And while I'm not going to give all of our secrets away, I can tell you one example of the behavioral interview questions that we ask on the job is to say, tell me about a time where you had to learn something new quickly that you knew nothing about before. Of course, an interviewer is being strategic with the type of behavioral interview questions that they're asking you. So naturally, you want to be strategic with the answers that you're providing back to them. There are two different places that I like to start when it comes to trying to come up with some answers for behavioral interview questions. And the first place that I like to start is to take a look at career highs and career lows. Because if you've had a career high, this really great accomplishment that you've had, or you've had a career low, which was a really major mistake that you made that you'll probably remember and regret forever, I'm guessing that you have a good story that goes along with those moments, right? If it's a career high, you had an example of these were all of the things that fell into place, these were all of the actions that you took, and all of the hard work that you put in to get yourself to that point. And with that career low, you also can think about, all right, these were maybe some of the mistakes I made along the way and the things that I learned during that moment in time. And the other area that I like to look at is to actually pull my inspiration from the job description. So if I'm looking at a job description and I'm looking to apply for a customer service role, I am going to think back on all the different customer experiences that I've had over the years at the different places that I've worked. And I would think about a time where I made a customer's day, where they were super happy with what I did for them. They maybe left us a review online. Something went really well and they were really raving about the service that I provided. On the flip side, I might also look at a time where I dealt with a very difficult customer that no matter what I did, they weren't going to be happy with what the service was that we were providing at the time. So same rules apply here. If you made a customer's day, you can talk about, hey, these are all the things that went right. If you had a day where you dealt with a really difficult customer, you could talk about maybe these are the things I would try to do differently. So for every single answer that you come up with for a behavior interview question, you want it to have 3 different things. The first thing is going to be the problem or the issue, essentially your conflict of the story, if you will, what your starting point is for your story. The second thing that you want to have is your action or your reaction in the story. What are the different steps that took place next? And the third thing that you're going to want to have is your result. So, what was the outcome of the story? How did things turn out with the project? How did things turn out with the issue or the problem? And if you tell your story right, if you give the best answer, it's always going to end on a positive professional note, no matter what it is. No matter whether it's a career high or whether it's a career low, your answer is going to end on a positive and professional note. So let's dive into an example here. So say that the problem or the issue where our story starts is that your department head comes to you and says, hey, I want you to put together this presentation for our next board meeting, and it's going to be presented to the CEO of the company. So that's our problem, our issue. This is where our story starts. So number 2, we're going to talk about those action steps. So your action steps are the timeline that you put together, how you figured out a plan for the team, how you delegated, what steps you took to make this presentation a reality. And then lastly, the result. How did things go? Did the CEO love your presentation to the point that they decided to take your presentation and turn it into the next great product that their company was going to develop? Or did the CEO hate your presentation, thought it was the worst thing that they'd ever heard, and somebody in your department actually ended up quitting because they were so upset about how everything turned out? So again, this story has 2 different ways that it could go. It could go really, really well, or it could go really, really, really poorly. Now, what it comes down to is how you then phrase your actual story to the person that is interviewing you. Because if it did go well, you're going to talk about, this was how I delegated. These are the great things that happened. These are the steps I took. These are those really great actions. This is this really positive result and how I ended up. Now, if the story went south and things just didn't go well, you're going to say, well, looking back in hindsight, I maybe wouldn't have delegated that task to Karen. I maybe would have set more realistic deadlines of what I could actually get accomplished in a certain amount of time. You're going to put the positive spin on the lessons that you learned and how you can apply those lessons in the future if a situation like this were to arise again at this potential company. Now that you've got a few stories identified that you could use to answer a behavior interview question, the next thing you want to do is actually look up some very common behavioral interview questions that you could be asked. And we actually did the heavy lifting for you. We have put together a few different articles that have some commonly asked behavioral interview questions, and we have linked those up in the description box below if you want to go ahead and check those out. One of the resources that we included is actually from LinkedIn. It's a really great PDF that talks about asking behavioral interview questions from an employer's perspective. So that's kind of a fun way to switch things up and really make sure that when you are putting together your answers, you're thinking about it and how the employer, the person actually doing the interview, how they might react to your answers to these behavioral interview questions. And number 2, once you have identified some of these behavioral interview questions and thought about how your stories actually go along with those, you want to practice, of course. Practice your answers. Now, one of the tips that we shared in our most recent video, which was talking about power tools for the job search, which I will go ahead and leave linked up here in the corner box, we talked about how important it is to consider videotaping yourself. So actually take out your smartphone and do a few videos of you answering these behavioral interview questions to make sure that you are sending the right message and to make sure, like we talked about, you are ending all of your stories on that positive and professional note. So now that you've practiced those answers and you are ready to rock and roll for your interview, it is time. You have arrived at the company, you are sitting in the parking lot a few minutes before you have to go in for your interview. Now is the time for step number 3, which is to review your answers. So pull out your smartphone and look at those recordings that you took of yourself providing the answers to those behavioral interview questions, or review any notes that you have written down to make sure that, again, you are familiar with the variety of stories that you can pull from depending on what type of behavioral interview question you actually get asked in the interview. Now, the fourth step is actually one of my own personal tips, something that I have used many a time going into an interview, and that is to write all of your answers down on a sheet of paper. Yes, this one's blank, but you will have lots of answers on yours. And what you're gonna do is in the portfolio that you bring with you to the actual interview, it is going to have a notepad in it. And what you're gonna do is you are just going to slide this sheet of paper in right behind the notepad so that you have all of your answers with you. So that then when it does come time to actually answer the questions, if you are sitting in your interview and you're taking notes while you're in the interview and they do ask you a behavior interview question and your mind goes blank, which it could happen. It's happened to me. Trust me, everybody deals with it, but that's why you have these notes with you so that if your mind does go blank, all you have to do is just lift up your sheet of paper, take a peek at the answers that you have written down, and then that will help jog your memory on some of those different stories that you want to pull from. And on that note, honestly, behavioral interview questions are hard. They are tricky. It takes a little bit to master them. And so if your interviewer does ask you an interview question that you're like, I need to think about this for a second, it's okay to say, could I have a moment to just get my thoughts together before I answer this? Number one, it's going to look a lot better than if you just start rambling something instead of actually going through your answer like you practiced. And number two, it's a heck of a lot better than saying, while you're trying to get your stuff together to figure out what you're gonna say. So just ask your interviewer to say, hey, can I just have just a minute here to get my thoughts together? Check out your sheet of paper in here in your portfolio and just jog that memory, remember that story, remember you've already practiced, you've got this. And I did want to note too that this portfolio, I just got this from Target. There are a lot of really cheap options out there to get a portfolio. You could, of course, order a custom one online if you wanted to. We have some at Express that have our Express embossed on them. So there's a lot of different options, but I don't think I even paid $20 for this. So definitely a cheap option and different ways to find a portfolio that you like and that looks really professional. Again, like we talked about in our job search powers tool, again, leave that linked up here one more time, that we would highly recommend checking out. Now, let the story of my friends and my conversation with them be a lesson to you. Don't be one of those people that is unprepared when it comes to behavioral interview questions, because like we talked about, it's pretty certain that you're going to be asked at least one of those in any interview that you go into. But if you can take a look at these really impressive moments, or maybe not so impressive moments in your career, you're able to draw stories from them, talk about what you learned from them, and have all of those prepared and sneakily hidden in your portfolio. As long as you've got all that, you have all the tools that you need to go ahead and master those behavioral interview questions. To wrap up this video, we would love it if you commented down below in the comment section what is one behavioral interview question that you've been asked in a recent interview, so that we can build a great list in the comments for anyone who watches this video in the future, so that they have some behavioral interview questions that they can draw from as well to help prepare for their next interview. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you back here next Wednesday at 4 o'clock Central Standard Time, where we welcome another guest to our channel, and she is going to be sharing some of her best tips to help you get your career in the express lane. We'll see you then.